Your ego is a reflection of your self-perception. Bars. This is a random thought I had while having a conversation with a friend maybe a week ago, something like that. And what I mean by that is you only get offended by things or defend yourself or protect yourself in an egotistical way about anything that somebody brings up or that somebody sees you doing or that you really get embarrassed about. That's you self-projecting your own inner doubt or your own insecurity through ego. You're protecting yourself because you don't like somebody calling that out about you. It makes you feel targeted, it makes you feel insecure, it makes you feel all these things, which triggers the ego. So of course, I believe the best way to start curing ego is to blame yourself for everything in life, whether it's good or bad. You have something to do with everything that ever happened in your life. I mean, sometimes things are like 99% out of your control, but that's rare. If you say that about most of the things that happen in your life, then you're coping. And that's not true. But you're not supposed to blame yourself out of self-hate. You're supposed to do it out of self-love and the urge to grow. The intent behind why you're blaming yourself is to understand yourself better and grow and get rid of insecurities and, by extension, ego. For example, I got my heart broken when I was 14, I got my heart broken again when I was 16, and those two were like the big major ones that I grew a lot from. But I blamed myself. But it was from hate back then, and that's not a good thing, and I grew a lot slower because I viewed it that way. But as I got older, I reflected on the stuff with more understanding or acceptance of myself, but still looked at what I did wrong to cause this to happen, because in some way, shape, or form, I was involved in the cause and effect. I chose to talk to the girl. I chose to ignore the red flags. I chose to let things slide, etc. I didn't have the self-love at the time to get myself out of that situation or avert the crisis of heartbreak. But now, I haven't gotten my heart broken since. So obviously I learned something. But I learned by reflecting and understanding what I did wrong. Bypassing the ego of, I didn't do anything wrong, she just broke my heart, she's a bitch, which is true in a sense, like what they did is wrong, but I also see it in a different light now in terms of I am 99% sure I know why things happened the way they did, and it wasn't out of malice, it was more insecurity on their side, ego on their side, right? And I'm sure they both still think about or know that they did me wrong. Even if I forgave them and even if they bury it in their own subconscious or conscious, I'm sure they deep down know the truth, but they hide from it, they ignore it. And that's what most of us do. We ignore truths, we ignore flaws in ourselves, and we try to protect our ego. But your ego is your worst enemy if you don't tame it and turn it into something valuable for your life, like I have for the most part. Now, it's not that I don't have ego, but my ego has evolved into something useful and beneficial in my life. I have an ego in the sense of I'm confident, and I'm usually very certain in the things that I say or do, and 95 to 98% of the time, I'd say the stuff I do aligns with my life, and if let's say I'm having an argument with someone, I feel like I'm usually right. Unless it's a subjective thing, then maybe I'm wrong. But if I am wrong, I'm totally open to admitting it, and I'm totally open to shifting my mindset. A lot of people just defend their point, defend their stance, even if they're wrong. And even if you give them undeniable proof, they'll still reject the thought or whatever it is. People aren't open-minded. Now, I'd say 1% of my ego is still the old one, in the sense of I'm not perfect. I haven't gone through enough change or just enough reformation to say I fully have changed my ego and there's no spark of the old one left. But I'd say there's 1%. It's very rare, but on an occasion, I'll have an ego spike of like defense for myself. However, the reason I say only 1% is left is because even when I do have those moments, which is pretty rare, I recorrect very quickly. Like I don't defend my point forever, or I don't defend my point in my mind. Either sometimes it takes seconds for me to catch it and be like, oh, my ego is doing the wrong thing again, or my ego is self-sabotaging. Sometimes it takes longer and I'll reflect later, but it's very rare, regardless, in both manners. But it's human nature, it's normal. However, to become someone who transcends ego and who is simply above it and uses it as a tool. You have to transcend human nature. You have to master yourself. You have to master yourself as a human to be at the top level of humans, to be a top tier human. And as for actionable steps, the first one I already mentioned is start blaming yourself for everything. Whether you think you're right or not, just blame yourself. What's the harm in blaming yourself? There's only harm in blaming yourself is if you're doing it through hate or you're egotistical. But if you are open-minded and you're open to change, then you know that self-reflection is vital. Self-reflection is what's going to make you that human without ridiculous ego, and that can change and adapt and grow and is eventually going to become a top tier. 2, which sort of stems from that, is being conscious. Be conscious of yourself. Understand yourself. And of course, a lot of that comes from self-reflection and presence. You need to be present in a moment. You need to live in reality, not in the past or in the future. You need to live in the now while perceiving the past and the future. And 3, be yourself unapologetically. Honestly, if I had to sum it all up in one word, it's be yourself unapologetically. Because if you are you and you don't give a fuck what nobody else thinks, then you don't have an ego, at least not a bad one. And that's pretty much me, I'd say on the majority scale. I'm someone who I can admit pretty much anything that's happened in my life. I remember when I was younger, like I hated to admit that I was watching porn still, or that my life was just in complete shambles, etc. I wanted to pretend like I was more than I really was, I was better than I really was. But if you have that ego and you don't have the humility to admit that I have problems and I need to grow, then you never will. And even now, I'm growing, I've grown a lot, but there's still more growth. I'm 19. I can't possibly know everything yet. Even when I'm 30, I'll be way ahead of where I am now because the next 10 years, 11 years of growth are going to be ridiculous, I'm assuming. But even then, I'll have more to learn. Till the day I die. There is no such thing as a know-it-all. There's a know almost everything, but there's always something new to learn. Even if 99.99999% of people can't teach you shit, somebody will. There's always somebody that knows something you don't. And pretty much anyone who's a specialist or who has climbed the ranks of life in some way, shape, or form, whether it's business, spirituality, physical, like food and exercise, or learning how to master their brain, etc., they have at least one thing to teach you, and you have something to teach them. And learning becomes far more potent, far more exponential, and far more fun when you can drop ego and learn for the sake of bettering yourself, knowing that there is more out there than you and the stuff you're trying to defend. And if you adopt this mindset and you conquer your ego, you won't be the same person you are now that you're trying to defend anyways. You'll be better. Thank you for watching. If I resonated with you in any way, shape, or form, I implore you to like, subscribe, and turn on noties so you never miss a future upload. If you'd like to know me on a more personal level, you should check out my vlog, Joseph Marrone. The link will be in the description. Bye.